candidates. This created an indirect democracy rather than a direct democracy, meaning that the president is elected not directly by the people, but by state officials. This made sense at the time because, in truth, people were not well informed about the government or political candidates. They didn't have access to that information. But because today we have social media, people are now well informed through it about politics more than ever before. This, of course, leads people to making well-educated decisions. And through social media, the information it provides actually encourages the action of dismissing the Electoral College in order to create a direct democracy for our society. I'd also like to address the term that you talked about, hate speech. Hate speech is actually protected under our First Amendment in the Constitution. So regardless of whether or not it's, everyone has the right to have hate speech on social media. I'm not saying that it's right, but it is protected. The only thing that isn't protected is that if it's in regards to that threatens people or suggests violent actions. I'd also like to address the fact that you said fake news, that a lot of times the information that is given on social media is fake. Well, the thing is though, false information, fake news, is non-unique to social media, meaning that is not limited within the confines of social media. It is, you can find fake news wherever you go, anywhere you go. The newspapers, articles, websites, all contain fake news no matter where you go. So it's not simply limited to social media, despite the fact that you said that. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Tate. No.
I'm going to start out. So we're going to start out negating the affirmative resolution. Starting out, we're going to continue on discussion of hate speech. And one of them is that, yes, it is protected by the Constitution, and it is very difficult to stop it, but it allows people to gather when they wouldn't be able to prior to social media. One example is if you have a group on the West Coast, normally they wouldn't be able to have any discussion with the same members on the East Coast, but social media can link them together. And it might increase hate speech, which is protected by the Constitution. This can cause division in societies, as we're seeing in the current political climate in America, and it will lead to increased violence. One major thing is also cyberbullying. It's causing increased suicide rates, and that also affects the mental health of society. And bringing that back up, democracy is made of the people. Mental health issues affect the people, and it will affect their interaction with democracy. And then we've also had democracy longer for society. So social media has had its place in there. And the definition for democracy is they say the word that more or less gives them the option to shift out of one part of the definition. This is abusive in this debate, that once we refute their case, they can shift out of their definition and define it as something else. And we prefer our definition of democracy that is absolutely needed or required. And then going back on, we're going to continue with fake news. One thing is the undermining. One example given is the undermining of the 2016 election by Russia, and this just undermines the process of democracy. Yes, you're giving people a vote, but when the sources to inform them to vote, or the actual election process themselves are interfered with, it undermines the whole process, which is basically the same tool that gives them a voice is being used against them. And then it also brings into question the laziness of society. Most people today will look at a headline and they'll run with that. They won't fact check or double check their sources. One example was in Australia recently. One of the first Muslim women to be elected to parliament. Online, they accused her of not laying a wreath on a national day of remembrance. And this led to people flooding her Facebook page with recent comments. And this would have been prevented if they double-checked their sources
both of the second speakers. I'll start the timer now.
I have a question. So you mentioned that social media links people together, and you were connecting that to hate speech, but I didn't really see your point. How does that connect to hate speech?
It allows one group on, so normally prior to social media, you had, telephone, TV, and some of them wouldn't have access to those channels to be able to voice their opinions. It's much like how corporations kind of like can say or allow you to say what you want, but there are limits to it. And prior to social media, they wouldn't have been allowed to use those channels like TV, radio, to communicate with each other unless they were in the local area or they had their own network, which very few people do. And so social media just allows them to connect more online. Websites like 4chan, Reddit, there are communities for specific topics that allows them to gather and then communicate and meet up in person.
So, but that helps democracy, like by more connection, by people being able to meet up. You're actually able to create groups that actually help towards democracy, towards problems. Are you suggesting that it also increases the amount of people who are like, I guess, part of hate groups or something to come together?
Well, hate speech is protected by the Constitution, so they are allowed to do that. The problem is when it causes the divisiveness with other people of opposing views. One such example was in, I believe, Georgia, when they had the Black Lives Matter protests, and then the lone, was not a gunman, but a driver, drove through the crowd. That's one such example.
But how did that relate to social media?
Because he was found to have connection with social media groups online.
Do you have statistics on that?
Statistics? We can pull it up on
Time. All right, now we're going to move into the third speaker for affirmative.
Joanna. She said that. Okay, I would first like to start off defining hate speech. According to dictionary.com, it is abusive or threatening speech or writing that expresses prejudice against a particular group, especially on the basis of race, religion, or sexual orientation. Hate speech, like we said, is protected by the First Amendment. It is also inevitable in social media. People, if you have a strong opinion about something, you can't, most of the time you're not influenced by what other people say. You also mentioned fake news, but fake news to an extent is irrelevant to democracy. Research shows that as of March 2018, around 52% of Americans felt that online news websites regularly report fake news in the United States, and another 34% stated that they believe online news websites occasionally report fake news. So people know that the news is fake that they see, but that still doesn't affect how they vote. How can people be influenced by something that they believe to be unreal or untrue? And also, you guys mentioned peer pressure. Not all peer pressure is necessarily bad. There's such thing as good peer pressure. According to research, if properly harnessed, the same peer pressure can motivate individuals to stay focused and work hard towards achieving their goals. Positive effects of peer pressure on teenagers are also evident by the example of a student who is motivated by other students to get good grades. Let's see. So my first point that I would like to bring up is that social media grants us fast access to knowledge and information. According to a recent study on monk seals are the most endangered species of seals on the planet. But what does this have to do with democracy? A digital news publication from Atlantic Media's Government Executive Media Group called Route 50 reported that federal researchers used Instagram to collect information on human interactions with the endangered monk seals. The study from the NOAA involved sifting through almost 3,000 Instagram posts with the hashtag monk seal to get a sense of how often people were interacting with the endangered animals. It says that the NOAA's monitoring efforts included sighting reports from the public and non-emergency sightings by phone or email, but these reports they felt like were helpful in determining where the seals were at any given time, but they did not describe the full human interaction. Therefore, they used social media. Instagram, they found, offered a more unvarnished look at the encounters. It says that social media posts they felt weren't a comprehensive monitoring tool. but because the traditional reports contain better information on identifying markings and specific locations and things like that. But the Instagram posts documented in real time people's interactions with the mock seals, including clear signs of disturbance and things of that sort. So this just goes to show that social media does allow us to have quicker and more updated access to information and news. My second point, social media allows for people to have a direct interaction with political candidates. A lot of political candidates are very active on Twitter. In this way, they can utilize the platform as an innovative way to maximize awareness and civic engagement. In election campaigns, candidates are able to receive comments and messages and feedback from their supporters. Even people who don't support them are able to voice their opinion, but that is why we have democracy, because we as people are able to say what we believe. Social media allows for democracy to be put into action by allowing citizens and users to speak openly about public topics. When using social media as a tool for civic engagement, politicians have the ability to crowdsource information and feedback. According to the Advanced Learning Institute, government representatives have the ability to collect data and insight from their followers that can be compiled and analyzed for directional insight, such as considering polls, survey questions, and things of that sort. In political campaigns, also authenticity and transparency is highly valued by the targeted audience, regardless of party identification. To some extent, putting a focus on transparency in all government communications is an effective way of gaining the trust of citizens as voters. So social media gives candidates this opportunity to be more transparent with their voters, which is why social media is necessary for democracy. Thank you.
Good, thank you, Joanna. And then the third speaker for negative, Marcella.
Alright, so this house negates that social media is not necessary for democracy. The definition you have, democracy, from Cambridge Dictionary defines democracy as the belief in freedom and equality between people or a system of government based upon this belief in which power is either held by elected representatives or directly by the people themselves. You should prefer our definition because it is our concrete definition and not abusive. You talk about hate speech. You cannot stop hate speech, you're right, on social media, but hate speech around the world has increased because of social media. According to hate speech on social media, global comparisons, of 2019, incidents have been reported on nearly every continent. Much of the world now communicates on social media, with nearly a third of the world's population active on Facebook alone. As more and more people have moved online, experts say individuals inclined towards racism, misogyny, or homophobia have found that can reinforce their views and goad them to violence. Social media platforms also offer violent actors the opportunity to publicize their acts. This can cause division in societies that will lead to increased violence. From the same source, I have hate speech on social media. Perpetrators of recent white supremacist attacks have circulated among racist communities online and also embraced social media to publicize their acts. Prosecutors said that the Charleston church shooter who killed 9 black clergy worshipers in June 2015 engaged in a self-learning process online that led him to believe that the goal of white supremacy required violent action. Social media causes more hate speech, which makes it not necessary for democracy. You also brought up voting. We didn't talk much about that. Social media does not help minorities vote. This house negates that social media is not necessary for democracy because it has helped in ways where democracy, it has not helped in ways where democracy needs to improve. For example, making it easier for minorities to vote. According to The Atlantic, voter suppression is warping democracy. In 2018, there was a survey done by The Atlantic and the Public Religion Research Institute that shows that Black and Hispanic citizens are more likely than whites to face barriers at the polls. Social media does not help minorities vote. It is not possible for people to vote online. According to Business Insider Gallup in 2018, online voting is unavailable for most Americans. Some states allow military service members and others select overseas citizens to vote, but not regular Americans. Social media is not necessary for democracy. You also brought up technology. so many things that are ingrained in society and are not needed, meaning if you took away these things, society would still function. Social media actually brings negative causes to democracy. According to Martin Tisney, in why technology hasn't delivered more democracy, technology can be used for anti-democratic ends, such as tracking and whereabouts and actions of pro-democracy activists. Social media actually causes more mental health because of democracy. And democracy is the people, so that's why it applies that. You can go back to our definition that was not abusive. And then I also have, according to technology's impact on democracy, between positive results and added difficulties, social media is not only used for positive social media is not only used for positive things. People are misinformed. Okay, they're used for anti-democratic forces such as terrorist groups, far-right political parties, or extreme groups. You can go back to my hate speech, and that's it.
All right, thank you, Marcella. So we're moving on to the most exciting portion of the evening. We have our grand crossfire, so that means that everyone's allowed to participate, not just one person. So I've got 3 minutes on the clock, and start whenever you'd like.
Okay, I have a question.
Yeah.
Where did you guys get your definition of necessary from?
Necessary? Merriam-Webster. I have a question. So what exactly is the exact wording of democracy under